Today is Tuesday, October the 22nd, 2024, and the board meeting is now called to order. It is currently 6:01 p.m., and all board members are here except for Dr. Carson Cottingham and Director Hudson and our student advisor, Sophia. This meeting is now called to order. We will now have the second Vice Chair Harnish, who is with us today, to give us the land acknowledgement.
Thank you. We are gathered here today on the land of the Kalapuya, who are represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. The relationship between the Kalapuya people and this land continues unbroken to this day, and we offer gratitude for the land and for the generations past and present who have stewarded the land since time immemorial. We respectfully acknowledge and honor the past, present, and future Native American and Indigenous students and staff of Salem-Keizer Public Schools. We invite you to join us in honoring these ancestral grounds and celebrating the resilience and the strength of all Native American and Indigenous people.
Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Superintendent Castaneda, are there any modifications to the agenda?
No, there are none.
Okay. I will turn this portion of the meeting to Superintendent Castaneda prior to us having Superintendent Olga Cobb, Level Director Sarah Leroy, and Principal Thomas Charbonneau, who will lead us through a presentation and discussion regarding our third grade reading and English language arts results policy updates.
Thank you. Thank you, board members. So this is our first board monitoring session of our results policy. Specifically, we'll be talking about third grade reading. And I just want to set the stage first by thanking you for the time you're putting into this, and also thanking the team who have put considerable time into preparing the information that they're going to share, and also anticipating the most likely of your questions. We did have a practice monitoring session about 1 month ago, and saw some of the ways that it is a pretty clear project, but also in its own way a little bit tricky. And I think that tonight will be, easily an important conversation about real outcomes this time, but also the second in a learning process for all of us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Superintendent Cobb, who is very disappointed to not be physically with us, but in all other ways fully present. Olga, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Chair Richardson, board members, student advisor, and Superintendent Castaneda. As Superintendent Castaneda said, I am sorry I'm not there in the room. I am doing some important learning and then ready to share this report with you. Tonight we will give you a report on third grade reading. And third grade reading is one of our board goals and an important data point in our reports to the state. But before I go into our next slide, I want to introduce two people that are in the room. You heard their names, and they are there to answer any questions and then also to help me present tonight. Sarah Leroy is one of our 3-level directors at our elementary level, and she supervises and supports schools. Then Tom Charbonneau, who's there next to her, is one of our administrators in the curriculum and instructional department. And he supports the elementary level with everything related to grade instruction, assessment, and also professional development. Okay, so let's jump in. Next slide, please. So let's talk about our outcomes for third grade reading in English. This chart represents our third grade students, about 2,600 of them who did the state assessment last spring. Let me talk you through this chart. on the screen, you will see a red line that has an upward trajectory. It's going up where we want to go. This line represents the growth points that we have articulated. If you see there, you see some points that align with a specific year. And these are our growth points that we have articulated for our longitudinal performance goals. These are the places where we, Salem-Keizer, the progress that we, Salem-Keizer, want to make over the years to catch up to our goal of students being proficient in this assessment by third grade. The blue line that is in a downward trajectory is how our students are doing. The line is moving, as you can see, in the opposite direction that we want, and this is a big concern to us. A very important detail that is important for us to share today is that we usually call this a reading test, and the reality is that this is a comprehensive English language arts test that evaluates reading and writing. For example, students may have to read a passage and then have multiple choice questions, and they can pick from one of those. But they also are asked to write a summary of a text that they read, or to compare two texts, or they also have to produce an informational or opinion essay by the end of the exam. So let me tell you more about what we know and what we're doing to improve our outcomes. Next slide, please. As you saw in the last slide, 24.2% of our third graders met or exceeded the state assessment in English. Salem-Keizer is 3.1 points below our annual goal for proficiency. You saw that the lines are moving in opposite directions. We need to change that trajectory for our students. So as we do with any data results, our educators look into it and analyze what is happening for students who pass and then for students who don't pass the exam. For example, we know that there are a number of students who pass the reading component of the assessment. So remember reading a text and maybe doing that multiple choice question or answer, sorry, but received, so they passed that part. There's also a component where they're listening to a story and they have to click on some answers on the screen. So students may be passing that reading part of the assessment, but then they received scores of 1 or 2 in the writing component of the assessment. This is important information. This is critical information for us so we understand what to do in our next instructional moves. We know that students maybe are not writing or not producing enough writing, or the writing is not related to what they're reading. So there are many, many pieces of information that we can gather as we dig into the data, as we understand the data. Another very important factor is that, or variable, is that there are about 140 classrooms serving third graders in our schools right now. And about a fourth of those are dual language classrooms where instruction happens half of the time in Spanish and half of the time in English. As you may recall, we use an 80-20 language allocation model for all of our bilingual classrooms, our dual language programming. What that means is that we start teaching 80% of the time in Spanish in kindergarten and 20% in English. Then we move to a little more English and 70% of Spanish in first grade. Then 60% of English, and then 40% of Spanish in the second grade, until we get to 50-50, half of the time in English, half of the time in Spanish, all the way from third grade to 12th grade. For some of the third graders testing in English, the third grade is really the first time when they are receiving these 50-50% of the instruction in English and in Spanish. Before that, it was more Spanish than English. So this is just an important factor, an important piece of information when we look at this data. Sometimes this third grade reading assessment is testing our students in their weakest language. So I want to just pause a minute here to just remind you that students who are learning in English and in Spanish, who are in this dual language trajectory, have a different cognitive load. They have to work differently because they have to pull and make sense of content in two languages. They are building two languages as they go. That is a lot of work. This is harder in the early years. It's a hard process in the early years, but there are many years of research at the national and international level that show that our students who are learning two languages end up outperforming other student groups by the time they graduate. So lastly on this slide, I want to point out that the reading trajectory for our students look different depending on many factors like language or their individual abilities. Many of our students are making meaningful gains towards reading in English, even when their scores are not reflected on the proficient category of the state assessment. They are not quite passing the assessment. Now, I will say again, these 24% for us is a big issue that we need to fix. We just want today to give you more information so we can all understand what that number means, and then all of the steps we are taking to do better for our students and help our students do better. So let's go into our next slide so I can tell you more about our analysis and our actions related to this important goal. So I'm going to hold in here this blank space so I can give you a little bit of background and remind some of you that were at the board before. We, this year, we are using STAR, which is a brand new assessment that we piloted last year in 9 schools. STAR is an incredible assessment that gives us really good information that we've never had before. And so it helps us understand where students are exactly in that trajectory and what are some of those foundational skills that maybe they haven't acquired yet, or that are still a big gap in their learning, so we can attend to that learning. So for us, it is very important to look at every single grade level. Now we have access with this new assessment, and we have access to data in English and in Spanish from kinder all the way through 12th grade. This is an amazing improvement on our journey around data in Salem-Keizer. So Emily, can you please show us the first box? Thank you. So this first box is 2nd grade early learning, early English literacy. For us, this 2nd grade assessment is really important because 2nd grade helps us understand the students' change between learning to read, learning to decode what reading is as a skill, and then to the skill of reading to learn. So reading to understand, to comprehend, and to learn. So that's why as a district, we pay attention to all of the grade levels, but in 2nd grade, there's this magic change that happens for students, and we want to deeply understand it. So these STAR assessment we do in fall, winter, and spring. And as I mentioned, this data is incredibly useful because it gives us individualized information to modify our instruction and fill in the gaps and help students advance in their reading trajectory. Different to the state assessment that we saw in that graph, where it's a one-time-a-year test that is almost like we call it a summative assessment. It just summarizes what the student knows in that specific time of the year related to standards. So for us, these type of assessments like STAR are very helpful because it helps us create the opportunities, modify and adjust the opportunities for learning that happen in our classrooms every day. We also learned that STAR helps us by giving us a very close idea on how our students will perform in the state assessment. Again, this is very helpful, not only because we want students to be great readers, but also because we want them to do well in that assessment that represents their knowledge, and we want to do better than that 24%. We know our students can do better. So let me explain this second grade box that you see there in front of you. In the first half of the box, you see the English assessment results, and then on the second half of the box, you see Spanish. We have it also in colors there, so I'll walk you through what that color code means. In third grade and second grade, for the students that did the assessment this fall, we have 37% of our students who are reading at or above benchmark. That means that they're developing as readers just as they should. And we have no concerns. Teachers are doing the whole group instruction for them, and they're doing great. 20% of students in that blue are on watch. It means that the system, the assessment just caught something that they need the teacher to pay attention to so the student doesn't fall behind. So the students are developing, they're telling us, not at an intervention level, you don't have to worry as much, but there's something that you have to pay attention, and then the system helps us recognize what it is exactly that we need to pay attention to help the students develop and get into that green zone. Now, the yellow means that 21% of students in second grade right now need an intervention. That means that the teacher does the lesson and then maybe calls them to a small group to reinforce the learning, to give them additional practice, and just help them with a specific skill that is lagging a little bit. And then students in the red line, the 22% that you see there in that first half, are students in need of urgent intervention. This means that these students may be 2 years behind in the reading trajectory. And so for them, we have to do not only whole group instruction or small group, but also one-on-one support or support with the reading specialist, or support with an after-school club, or an instructional assistant doing a triple dose, sometimes of a specific skill. So you see there in the screen how students are doing in Spanish in all of the percentages that represent their learning. So let's look now at third grade. Thank you. So same way of reading it. It is very important to mention that this is the very first year that we have this level of information for third grade. And so again, we are able to understand and then be able to kind of take the temperature of how our readers and writers are doing right now, related to how they're going to do in that state assessment. There's a pretty close correlation between how students are doing in START and how students will perform in the state assessment. So our third graders right now, you see there in English, are 46% of them are reading at benchmark. There are 15% of them that can join that green group. They just have something that the system is telling us, pay attention to these, and then get them moving into the benchmark level. 19% of them are receiving intervention, and 19% of them are in need of urgent intervention. So teachers are already working in teams to develop plans to support students' individual goals. And then you see there also the numbers in Spanish on the same way that we just talked about in English. So now I'm going to turn it on to Sarah Leroy, who will help you understand a little bit more what happens with the reading trajectory and how we study it closely, and how, even though she'll show you, even though a student can start the year in urgent intervention, being 2 years behind, with the key and the right instructional strategies that our teachers utilize, they can make it all the way to green by the end of a year. So I'll let Sarah walk us through the next slide, and then Tom will join her after. Thank you.
Sarah, will you let me jump in for one moment before you jump?
Absolutely.
Can we go back to the STAR? Yes, thank you. Here, I would just like to really acknowledge the elementary team and the curriculum and instruction team, because This is in its second year of implementation. The absence of an interim assessment has been a real and continues to be a liability for our district. If we can't answer the question for kids across many grade levels, how are you doing right now? And if we're relying on an annual measure, that is not enough to be diagnostic or to make and track progress. And so this was introduced the year that I arrived, largely under Olga's leadership. And we are in the process of scaling it, so all elementaries and all middle school dual programs. And this is an important building block that we will continue to scale in our system because we must have this level of information. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. So I get to share with you a slide of a journey, right? We see a lot of movement here. What we have on the left is third grade, our current fourth graders' scores last year as third graders at our 9 pilot schools that did STAR. This is a test in English. So here's their scores where they landed this fall as fourth graders. But it doesn't start in third grade. Literacy development starts long before that, right? It starts at home when those babies come home to their parents, their caregivers. Some would even say even before they are at home, right? We're speaking to our kids, we're thinking with our kids, we're reading books with our kids, and parents are critical in that development. And they come into our schools, and we are partnering with parents through this journey, right? As their literacy development continues. So what's important to see here is all this green, that's that at benchmark, or an easier way for me to think about it is really on grade level. Like this is a good sign, right? We are on grade level or above. It gets bigger by fourth grade, right? That green increases by quite a bit. So we see a lot of movement in the right way. And we also see this red line, the 2 years of intervention. 2 years are below, right? Urgent intervention, decreasing. So overall, what we see is what we want, right? We want that right movement for our students to continue to get to this green, right? So that's a celebration. What happens all along the way here? You see a lot of students are going up, most students are going up, but not all. We want to talk about that. So what happens is our teachers are working really hard in our buildings, right? Partnering with parents to identify those strategies, what is going to work for our children, right? How are we going to get them to be these proficient readers? We are looking at data. We're looking at the STAR data, right? At fall, winter, and spring. We are looking at other assessment data. We look at our intervention data. We look at informal assessments. We look at lots of data to figure out what instructional moves we need to make as educators to ensure our students are moving in the right direction. So when we see this going the right direction, we know that's working, right? Our teachers have looked at their whole class and said, I need to make this adjustment for my whole class. They looked at small groups of students, these 5 kids, they need this. This other 5 students need this, right? This is the intervention we're going to do. We have research-based interventions that we work with our staff to use with our students, and we monitor those. Are they working? Are they not working, right? What else can we do for our students? And we look at the individual student, and we talk to parents, right? What can we be doing at home to help support our students on their journey to proficiency? So what happens when it's not working? We do see some movement down, right? Some students, right, are moving out of the green to blue, right? We see some of that, and we don't want that, right? But why might that happen? It might happen because those instructional moves that we're trying just aren't working. What we need to note is that the standards get harder, right? We're asking more of our students as readers by the time they're in 4th grade. So we need to adjust our instruction, right? If it's not working, we need to keep working at it. That's something that could be happening. We could have a student who we haven't identified a disability, right? If we're not seeing growth over time, we have a pattern, we need to address that, right? We need to identify that and get the student the support they need. We could also have students who aren't attending. It's really hard for our teachers to do that critical work when the students aren't there. And this is where I'm going to make my plug for our attendance campaign that went out parallel with the state's attendance campaign. Students, we need students in school, and we need to partner with our parents to get our students at school, because it's critical that we have them there so we can teach them. Along with partnering with parents for attendance, right, of course, and we want to continue to partner with parents on those instructional strategies, how we can support at home, what we're doing at school. We have conferences this week, right, beginning tomorrow. All parents are invited. We really want to meet with all of our parents these next 2 days to go over the STAR data. We have the fall data, to talk to parents about that. We have math data, and we have attendance data, and we have all sorts of good data for our to sit down with our teachers and parents to talk about how we're supporting our students. And next I have Tom Charbonneau to talk about what the district is also doing at a greater level.
Director Richardson, if I can, while we make the transition to Mr. Charbonneau, Dr. Charbonneau, I should say Dr. Leroy and Dr. Charbonneau are in the room. Something important that I wanted to mention that Sarah talked about briefly is that in this journey, in this path, in this trajectory that students make, the standards get harder. We are asking students to do more, to produce more, to understand reading at a different level. Vocabulary changes, comprehension gets harder, the skills get harder. And so when we see all that green, when we see that our students are making all of that work, it means that they're working really hard and their teachers are doing an excellent job at helping them get through all of those skills. When we see the red lines going down, then we can also hone in and identify what's happening for these learners so we can adjust and we can provide all the supports that Dr. Leroy told you about. Thank you.
Okay, can you go to the next slide? So this slide is really focused around the things that we are doing in schools starting at this school year and our next steps to address this problem. We looked at this data as an elementary team for all of our building leaders at the beginning of the school year, at the beginning of August, and nobody was happy. None of us were looking at the data and were not wanting to make change in the right direction. So our building administrators and our curriculum and instruction team have really been working on looking at our current practices, because we know that the practices that we do right now, if we continue what we did last year the same way, that we're going to end up with similar results. So we're trying really hard in every building to build capacity with both our teachers, our administrators, and this year in every single school building at the elementary level, we have foundational skills specialists, and we are working with them to really make changes that are going to show in our students' learning. And we know that once we have improved our students' learning, we'll have better student outcomes on both the STAR assessment that Mrs. Cobb talked about, but also that OSAS end-of-year assessment. At the building level, we are working with Oregon State University to build the skill set of both our foundational skills specialists as well as our building principals. We, like what Mrs. Cobb talked about at the beginning, the OSAS assessment is both an assessment of reading and writing. And this year, we are really focusing from the curriculum instruction standpoint, on improving our teachers' writing skills, but also understanding what the outcomes are that students need to be able to produce on this assessment to show that they're proficient. We're really working on improving our literacy instruction and making sure that our teachers are teaching to the priority standards in literacy that are reflective by the state, and using the best strategies, materials, and increasing the rigor of instruction for our students, like what Mrs. or Dr. Leroy was just talking about. Our standards continue to get progressively more difficult over time, and we need our teachers to match that level of rigor in their instruction so the students can perform at that level as well. And then improving our data systems and our data tracking systems. The end of a year assessment in third grade on that state benchmark, and that's the very first time that those students have taken that state assessment. It's too late by then to make a difference. So using this STAR assessment in second grade, in first grade, even at multiple points of time during the third grade school year, like the data that she just showed, we gave that STAR assessment at the beginning of September. We'll give it again to all of the students in January so that we can continue to track their progress in learning. But eventually we want them to show their proficiency on that end of unit assessment at the end of the year in third grade that they do in either April or May. But throughout this plan that you see here, it really focuses on the partnership that we have with families, like what Dr. Leroy was just talking about. Conferences are starting tomorrow and on Thursday. And at the elementary level, we meet with every family that we can to talk about where the students are at and do some goal setting with them and provide them with some resources so that families can work together with the teachers to improve the outcomes. And then we'll have conferences at other times during the year so that we can monitor those goals, show how the students are flourishing, and continue to really work on building a partnership with our families to increase their literacy outcomes.
Okay, that is our report, and now we'll turn it back to you, Director Richardson, to see if there are any questions that we can answer.
Thank you very much for that report. At this time, board members, are there any questions that you'd like to ask? I have one. Are elementary students allowed to opt out of the STAR assessment?
No, the STAR
No.
assessment, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no. Yeah, it's part of our curriculum, and it's two parts. There's the computer adaptive test that they take on the Chromebooks, but then there's also what we call curriculum-based measures, or CBMs. So the one that third graders would take is a passage oral reading test. It only takes 1 minute, but basically they do that assessment with the teacher one-on-one, and it happens pretty quickly, and we get that data.
Thank you. I just wanted to make
Right
sure
away,
that all of
yeah.
our students are being assessed.
Yeah.
And if I could add one point to that, Salem-Keizer does have amongst the highest participation rates in the state assessment, which is our actual measure. And we, in almost every instance, meet the national expectations for participation. This does distinguish us from other districts in the state. And I add this only to say that this is one of the building blocks that we can use to our advantage as we get more and more serious and also start to make more and more progress on our understanding our students' growth trajectory. Having 95% of students participate in an assessment can give us confidence that we are at least accurately sampling from amongst our students, that there isn't a bias inherent in the sample. The next big step for us on that side and with STAR is ensuring that we're creating the conditions for both students and staff to understand that the assessment matters. And that's something that the curriculum team has been discussing extensively since August. We've been hearing from our school leaders about as well.
Yes,
So are we able to cross the data between the STAR and the attendance and/or other social determinants of health data?
We could, we could
Yeah.
definitely pull the attendance data.
Yeah, I think Jonathan had talked a little bit about how we are working on using that data.
Yep. Given that it's a new data source and a really rich data source, we are trying to connect it to as many things as possible. What we do know is that there's a strong correlation, don't necessarily know causation, but at least strong correlation between attendance and OSAS, and a really strong correlation between OSAS and STAR. So it would hold probably pretty reasonably that they would also see that connection between attendance and STAR as well. And the good news is because it's an interim metric, we can more closely associate school year attendance and school year learning together in ways that OSAS, because it also looks all the way through the year and all the way through summer, we can't do quite as well.
yes.
Thank you, Chair. This is, thank you for all the good work you all do and trying to help us. So it sounds like you're using the STAR in between. And then the slide before this, I was kind of curious, where you talked about some of the groups make very good progress when they go to the 4th grade, but some of the groups, for a variety of reasons like attendance, et cetera, it kind of comes down, requiring on the watch or additional interventions. So based on the data, are you able to separate, because which group or any particular based on the location of the school or who need more help so that we can straighten the curve or at least get
Yeah, we're able to break down the data and see individual
Okay.
student outcomes, both by classes and grade levels. So then teachers can collaborate on strategies to implement for those students. And then they can even use, they can actually administer the STAR assessment outside of those benchmark windows. So we can use it as a progress monitor to make sure that those students are making progress. Because like I said, we give the benchmark assessments in September and then again in January. But teachers can give those assessments in November or December just to make sure that those students are responding to the interventions that they have, that they're using.
So from what I heard, that you're also sharing with the parents the STAR data, like a progress card that they get, so they are able to keep track. So in terms of parent involvement, sometimes it's hard for all the parents to be involved during the conferences, at least when I was raising kids sometimes, and that's my experience. Are there any partnership with any nonprofits or what are they called, CBOs or any other voluntary organizations which allows volunteers to come and help either work with the students? I am assuming that they can repeat outside the classroom teaching also so that it will help reinforce what these children are needing.
Yeah, I don't know of any specific organizations, but I know that schools always encourage volunteers to come in and work with the students in regards to building those skills. We do the results from the STAR assessment get put onto what we call it the student assessment review, which gets put onto parent view, so the parents are able to access that, and we are having it translated to many different languages, so they're able to see that information.
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of matching these children who are entering that on watch to a volunteer who reads for them, because parents may not, when we used to get lots of data point, but how do you interpret the data and say that you need additional dose of help with the reading? Because sometimes the volunteers get to be like lunch break monitors in different places, may not be targeted for this particular intervention. That's my observation. Maybe I'm wrong in that.
Deputy
Thank
Superintendent Cobb wants to help us.
Thank you. I can't figure out how to raise my hand in Zoom, so I'm gonna do it physically. Dr. Chendagiri, we also have all of the things that Dr. Charbonneau said are things we do, and we also have very exciting partnerships happening right now. One of them is with the Coalition for Equality. You know, this group has supported our schools for many, many years, and right now we are developing a course of 10 to 12 weeks for literacy in schools, where they can help us by being a bridge between our teachers and the parents, and then teaching parents skills of literacy that they can do at home. Schools are right now, because of the early literacy grant also that the state provided us, there's an important component there for tutoring and parent engagement. So we're all trying to figure out what other ways can we implement to engage families in a very targeted work around literacy, so that families understand how to help kids break the code of reading and then get better in comprehension and vocabulary as they continue their journey through our system. And then lastly, we have a really great opportunity now that we're actually working with Salem Leadership Foundation to bring in groups of our faith organizations in schools with a target on literacy. So we're we're in the finishing touches phase of that partnership, but we are ready and very excited to welcome back any volunteers. Many schools have them already, but we want them in a more organized way so that we can help efforts around literacy in collaboration with any community member that wants to support us.
Thank you. Director Pressey.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to really make a comment and then ask a question. And I mainly wanted to make this comment as a parent of a second grader that is getting to go through this process. And I can see it in action specifically. I actually got a letter in the mail not all that long ago that tells me exactly where my kid is. She's in bilingual classes right now, so I get exactly like if she's on the benchmark for the English level literacy and what we're working on. I get so much information about, you know, if there's any intervention programs that she's participating in. I do think that all of this data is super helpful, and all the work that you all are doing is really, truly like wrapped around the child and very communicative to parents. So I just want to say thank you for that. And then subsequently, my question, based on the actual English language arts test and the status on not meeting that target, I was wondering if we have any kind of information on if there's, I guess, if we have any correlation or causation information on if we know if technical, like computer literacy also impacts. So I was just wondering like how maybe the test is administered or if that could be an impact in any way.
I don't know if we have any hard data about it, but I can tell you, watching students take the assessment for the past 8 years as being a building principal, it's really one of the first times. The students have a small, Chromebook with a pretty small screen. They're presented with, two different reading, separate passages that they have to read. And then on the right side of the screen is where they have to compose their response. And it really, they really want at least a 3-paragraph essay with a, introduction and a conclusion, and then some supporting, information from the passages, and they want them to reference the passage. So it's a pretty rigorous assessment. And we want to give students the opportunity ahead of time to understand what they're being asked to do. And we're working with the foundational skill specialists and principals to be able to present that to students ahead of time so that they're not kind of in a shock when they first run into that assessment at the end of the year, because we know that they're able to write better than a lot of them show on that assessment.
I'd like to briefly add on to that, and thank you for this question. There's a delicate balancing point between making sure our students are ready to experience the test format and becoming a district that spends its time teaching kids to test. We cannot become the latter. But there also are some core skills associated with testing that are part of being a learner. And some of the early skills are understanding how to interact with presented format on content on a screen. Those are material skills to learning, not just testing. And so what we're really working on right now is trying to identify those key skills, not test-taking skills, but key skills that show up in a test, and introducing in thoughtful ways experiences that help them feel more comfortable with that. One of the things that I can do for the board after this meeting, and also just encourage members of the public, if you're curious, is to get on and look at the sample questions. You can get on the State Department of Education website, and you'll see exactly what Dr. Charbonneau is talking about, which is this split screen and the visual challenges of seeing it for the first time. And I'm 47, not in third grade. So those are just helpful pieces of our own adult schema to be growing out as we think more and more about what these test results mean.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Charbonneau, I attended the recent Oregon School Board Association conference, and there was an entire section on using AI and kind of adaptively adjusting the testing format so that they can be adapted. Say one may be good at match the following, somebody else may be good at picking out a sound, so it's almost like an individualized way of adapting and then trying to help them build. So the question I'm saying is, does this STAR do that? Does it kind of adapt the testing based on the child, even though it may be testing for the same understanding of the content or reading?
Yeah, the first part of the test, well, there's two parts of the test. There's the CAT, or computer adaptive test, and then there's the performance task. And they take the two parts separately. The first one does start off kind of at grade level, and I think it's approximately 2/3 of the test where it's asking questions kind of at grade level. And then the last third of the test, per se, does kind of adapt based on how the student is performing on that first part. So if a student is really struggling on those first questions, it'll get into a little bit easier questions. But the reverse is true as well. That if the student's performing very well, it will ask some above grade level questions on that last piece.
It's almost like the Minecraft our children play with. If you can do it, then it'll give you harder and harder puzzles to solve. That's the reason I was asking you this. So
The kids would like Minecraft a lot better
Well-
than the OSAS, so I can tell you that.
I'm just using that as an example. Half the time we had to get our kids out of the computer just to study. No, the reason I was asking is, will that also adapt the reading material to help them grasp and then build up on that?
Are you referencing
This STAR
the
test will,
performance task?
the STAR test, does it adjust the reading
yeah.
or the studying material?
Yeah, the STAR test is also an adaptive test, yeah.
So it allows them to cater the reading curriculum to adapt to the child's actual functioning?
Yes.
All right. So now you talked about one of the reasons that the downward could be due to learning disabilities. I'm just kind of curious. So between third grade and fourth grade, are we able to, what percentage of students are we able to screen for any learning disability just to make sure that Or are we able to screen everybody for learning disability if they start showing this downward trend?
I don't know if the star isn't used to distinguish students or qualify them if they have a learning disability. But we do give the star assessment to our students that are in, various programs. It is used and mentioned in an IEP just to show where a student is performing compared to their grade level peers.
No, does it trigger us to send the child for testing? That's just because,
It could if we're seeing a pattern of a student not
Oh.
progressing, and then a teacher would see that and talk to the family and say, hey, we think the student might, let's check this out. There might be something else going on here. So let's, as a team, figure this out and
so we are able to catch
determine-
all of them.
Yes, it might trigger a conversation and a deeper look into what's happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Director Guzman Ortiz.
Thank you so much for all the information and for being on the hot chair, essentially. I was curious around whether the assessment star in this case, does it provide insight into the educator's strengths and needs when it comes to instruction? And if so, if you had some examples of kind of that differentiated support, recognizing that we have, just like kiddos, right? I see a lot of similarities when we think about educators, and I think all of us as professionals to children, we're all on different scales of strengths and needs for support. So I was curious about both of those.
I think, yes. I think when the teachers look at their data and they look at each class and they look at their grade level peers, and if someone's got a class that is doing great in fluency or something, then they'll have the conversation like, hey, how are you teaching that? What's going, so they do have those conversations, and then as an administrator or the foundational skills specialist can say, hey, I think let's work on some of these skills because I've noticed that your students aren't excelling here, right? And at the grade level, they are. So they'll step in and they'll, as peers, help each other, and foundational skills specialists and the principal will support.
I will add to that and maybe welcome Olga into this part of the conversation. It also gives us a chance to find patterns as a district about areas in early literacy that are not showing the progress that we expected. At an organizational pattern level, what that means is that we have not invested in the professional development and the instructional tools our staff need to be achieving the growth that would otherwise be expected. And I think we've already started to see some areas where we have a hypothesis that we need to be leaning in with better skills, better training, and better tools.
I was just going to say it's so important that the instructional strategies that work best for our students are aligned, especially with our CBOs, with our after-school programs, with our summer programs. They should be using the same strategies that we have shown that are proven in the classroom as well in those programs. And I too believe that those people have to be trained, just like our parents need to be trained. So when kids go home with homework, they also understand those strategies. I've heard from many parents who say, I can't help my student with their homework. They don't do it the same way that we used to do it when we were in school. I got off the telephone with my granddaughter right before I came into this meeting, and she was struggling with her father because he wanted her to do her homework in a certain manner, and she says, no, my teacher says this. It's just so important that we have that two-way communication with our CBOs and our parents.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, Dr. Shah.
Yeah, there's one question that, I volunteer in, we used to volunteer based on their experience. Is those variables, do they affect test result? Let's say if I'm tested on something which I never experienced, will that affect the test result? Just a curious question, I don't know.
It's an important question about test construction and test validity. It's also a good example of why systems like ours need to choose carefully. So for both OSAS and for STAR, they go through rigorous item testing, and there's a whole method to identify whether or not there's content bias that's baked into the question itself. And it isn't until items have cleared a bias testing evaluation period that they're released into the item bank. So does that mean that all of our students have all of the content or background knowledge necessary to understand every question? No. But it does mean that we can be confident that systematic bias has been removed from the items before they're presented to our students.
Well, thank you I'm glad that these tests have done that before they are released. Because sometimes, like, we are immigrants. When we come here, half the things we have to kind of figure out what others are doing and then basically fake it till you kind of make it. So we just have to understand the context and pretend as though it is happening, and then eventually you kind of get to know the why we are doing what we're doing. So I was just wondering if these kids go through the same thing. Sometimes they understand the context and fill in the word, or is it really, I don't know the answer.
Background knowledge does impact comprehension, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Also, lived experiences
Yes.
impact it. I have to share this with you all. It's been a very long time ago, but when I was in the 3rd grade, I remember taking state assessment, and this one question has lived with me because I'm just angry about it. But I lived in Texas. My mother was a single parent raising 3 girls, and the test said, you and your family are going to Colorado for a ski trip on vacation. Which of the items below will you pack for this ski trip? Thank you very much, Texas. We didn't see snow like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I came to Oregon. I still don't know how to ski, okay? All right.
Thank you for that good example.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought I was the only
Example,
one.
but-
Learn to drive on the wrong side of the road
That
when I
won't,
first came here.
that won't work. Do we have any other questions? You all are fast learners. And of course, we had great presentations. Yes.
I'd love to ask, I think Assistant Superintendent Cobb's here and those who are present, just for us as board members, as we're looking at this monitoring and kind of, getting to this cadence, but just curious, I'm always open for homework. So my question to you is, do you have any recommendations around, like, where else can we be curious inside and outside of the boardroom, as parents, as community members, so that we can support this work and continue partnering with, our district, but also our community, just open to advice.
I can start, and I would love to hear what the team has to say. But an important component of this work that is coming up in the next couple of years is an adoption of curriculum. We need to continue giving our teachers the best tools. And then, like Superintendent Castañeda shared, we need to continue having opportunities where we can sit with them and help them learn how to use those tools, or help them learn the best instructional strategies to continue moving the dial. So the board will have an opportunity coming up to hear our thinking and our process around the adoption of literacy for Salem-Keizer. I also love that in our district, we have elevated the importance of dual language instruction. So any materials that will come in front of you will be vetted to have the same level of content in English and in Spanish. And so we'll need your advocacy and your support. And then the second thing I'll say is that the work of literacy and good readers is the work not only of schools and families, but also the community. We have great partnerships happening right now with different organizations that are all invested in these. And so your voice, your advocacy with groups, resources that can come back to schools so we can have more people to read with kids, more reading specialists in schools really matter. I'll turn it to my team and see what they think.
I would just say, take the time to go see what teachers are doing with literacy instruction in the elementary schools. I had a great opportunity earlier this week to spend some time in Shirley and seeing, students learning to read. and seeing just the interventions and just the dedication that the educators have, it shows that they're not content with where students are reading right now, and they want to see students, reading at grade level as early as possible.
Thank you.
I have a, okay.
Yes.
So, I'm just thinking from a very concrete, practical prescription, what you would be able to give us, how many volunteers you need. We have got about 21 schools and elementary schools. So if you were to kind of give us a concrete prescription, like how many volunteers you'll need per school, so that as board members, we can go to the community saying, we need so many people to sign up in each school, or how much budget you think we should allocate towards each of those category of intervention you mentioned, so that we can get the curve back to where it should be in the red one, I think red or green or something, that color I missed. So that way, a little bit more concrete, how many things, so that next time when the budget comes up, we can keep an eye and say, this is the gap. If the curve has to go back to the red line, then what is the kind of investment? Because to me, that is the heart and soul of equity. Ultimately, if we don't put resource to close the gap, we are just kind of repeating the problem is not going to solve the problem.
I fear we're unable to answer the question, how many resources need to be invested? I can back into a few versions of the answer. First, I think we are in agreement with our colleagues in schools and our association partners in saying that smaller class size in the early grades really matters. And while we've been able to preserve ratio, even amidst very difficult budget cuts, there are still very significantly large classes, K through 3. And I have no doubt we will continue to hear from teachers who are facing difficult teaching conditions because of that. So in an ideal version of the future, what we'd be doing is investing in meaningful class size reduction in K-3. I don't know how to price that for you, except to say that it would be significant. The second thing that I will add, following on Olga's comment, is that our elementary literacy adoption, which is currently scheduled for a couple years from now, will be a major investment for our system. It is the most expensive adoption that a K-12 system can make, because it has the most students and the most teacher users. And we spend the majority of our time on that topic. So we need to be prepared and thoughtful but unflinching about that as a major investment of not just materials, but of training and time, so that we're ready to do it well.
And also, I think, as like a very tangible answer to how many volunteers are needed in schools or in classrooms, again, as someone that's like currently going through this, like I think the schools also do a pretty good job of asking specifically like when they need volunteers and putting out that information on Parent Square and having those signups. So, I mean, for folks to just get engaged and open up that app and sign up for slots that you can take.
As of the about 5th week of school, I think we were over 1,500 volunteers, processed volunteers, which means that since the pandemic, every year we've been rebounding. More and more people are being screened and welcomed into our schools to help. I think one of the key things that as a system and as a system of leaders we need to get better at is figuring out how to provide parents with actionable things they can do at home and as volunteers that support literacy in many different spaces. And literacy at home can be achieved with very simple tools and moves. Our families just need the time and the space to learn them. Yes, Doctor.
So this also is a reason I asked this question, is, the state is really thinking in terms of costing of how much it costs to educate a child so they can read by 3rd grade at a proficient level. Because for a long time, the QM model has not kept up with what is the budgeting, right? So this really raises the question because if we are going to work with our legislators, we can also have a way of explaining to them this is the kind of investment that will take to change the curve, or to at least have an idea what it costs. So when you're talking to the community and different partners. And we also have a legislative and policy committee members from our own board sitting with OSBA, so they can have this background information when it comes to some kind of concrete, tangible, rather than continuing the current service level. We really have to start thinking in terms of changing the paradigm rather than keep repeating the paradigm. That's the reason I just wanted to bring that. And then how many volunteers need to be trained in supporting this kind of reading, or how many minutes of reading the parents should be involved in every day. So things like that. Something little more concrete will help me talk to folks.
Thank you very much. Deputy Superintendent Cobb, I want to thank you so much for this report this evening and all of the answers to our questions. I want to thank Level Director Sarah Leroy and Principal Thomas Charbonneau. I also want to thank Director Jesperson for being here this evening. Thank you very much. And the board members, I want to thank you for all the questions that you've asked. Before we close, I want to give a shout out to all of the principals of Salem-Keizer School District. This is Principal Appreciation Month. We love each and every one of you, and we appreciate all of the work you do. We know we can't pay you for your services, but our students, you are impacting them, and you will make a difference in their lives. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to give a shout out to Governor Kotek, to Superintendent Castaneda, to Deputy Superintendent Charlene Williams for the great work they did with our attendance calls and postcards. I want to thank all of the level directors and administrators that were there, SKEA leaders, Ask ESP leaders for being there, all of our volunteers, Waldo staff, you did an outstanding job. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And our parents really appreciated those calls. And I think we have to keep pushing and help people understand the correlation of attendance to academic achievement. I want to thank each and every one of you again for being here tonight. It's 7:09. We are adjourned.